That day started just like any other quiet weekend. The house was peaceful, and I thought I had it all to myself. With the sun streaming through the windows and a gentle breeze coming in, I decided to spend the morning cleaning. The floors needed sweeping, the furniture needed dusting, and the kitchen was waiting for a good scrub. Mom was out running errands, and Jay, my stepbrother, had told her he'd be hanging out with his friends all day. "I won't be back until late," he had said with his usual casual tone, so I didn't expect him home anytime soon. Knowing I wouldn't have to deal with anyone getting in my way, I put on my favorite playlist, tied my hair back, and got to work. As I cleaned, the house felt different, calmer, quieter, almost like it was just mine. I hummed along to the music, enjoying the stillness. It felt good to be alone, without anyone around to make a mess or distract me. I had plans to finish cleaning, grab a snack, and maybe relax with a book later. Everything seemed so perfectly ordinary. Also, I thought. While sweeping the living room floor, I caught a faint sound, like the front door creaking open. I froze for a moment, unsure if I'd imagined it. The music was still playing softly in the background, but now my ears were tuned to every noise. "Mom," I called out, expecting no answer since she wasn't due back for hours. The next sound was unmistakable: footsteps. My heart skipped. Before I could even process what was happening, Jay walked in, his face calm as if he hadn't just surprised me out of nowhere. "Hey," he said casually, dropping his bag on the couch like it was the most normal thing in the world. I stared at him, confused. "What are you doing here? I thought you were out with your friends." Jay shrugged, a small smirk tugging at his lips. Plans changed. The peaceful morning I had planned suddenly felt different, like the quiet balance of the house had shifted with his unexpected return. And though I didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning. I was busy sweeping the living room floor, focused on getting every last speck of dust, when a sudden noise made me jump. It was the front door creaking open, loud enough to startle me out of my thoughts. For a split second, my heart raced. Mom wasn't supposed to be back for hours, and Jay had said he wouldn't be home until later. So who could it be? I froze mid-sweep, gripping the broom tightly. Then, I saw him. Jay strolled into the room like it was no big deal, his usual casual smile plastered on his face. He looked so at ease, as if his early return was nothing out of the ordinary. But to me, it was anything but ordinary. "You're home?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence as I stood there, wiping the sweat from my brow. Cleaning had been hard work, and now, on top of being tired, I was confused. Jay shrugged like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, plans changed," he said simply, tossing his bag onto the couch without a care. I blinked at him, trying to understand. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had told Mom he'd be out all day with his friends. Why was he back so early? And why didn't he look the least bit bothered by my surprise? "Plans changed," I repeated, my tone more curious than annoyed. Something about his unexpected return unsettled me, though I couldn't quite figure out why. He just smiled and plopped down on the couch, watching me with that same relaxed expression. As I stood there holding the broom, unsure of what to say, the air between us felt different. I had no idea what was going on in Jay's mind, but something told me this wasn't just a casual visit home. Jay shrugged, his movements slow and deliberate, before making his way over to the couch. He sunk into it with a lazy ease, as if he had all the time in the world. I expected him to pull out his phone or flip on the TV like he usually did, but instead, he just sat there, watching me. At first, I tried to ignore him and focus on my work. The broom moved across the floor in steady strokes, and I told myself his presence didn't bother me. But the longer his gaze lingered, the more I felt it. It wasn't like before when we'd joke around, tease each other, or have the usual sibling banter. No, this felt different. I could feel his eyes on me, following every movement I made. It was strange, almost like the air in the room had shifted. I stole a quick glance at him, hoping he'd look away, but he didn't. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as though studying me, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "Need help?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice had a playful edge to it, the kind that usually came with some teasing remark or a joke. But this time, it felt heavier, like there was more behind his words. I paused, gripping the broom a little tighter. "I've got it," I replied quickly, shaking my head. My voice came out steadier than I felt, and I hoped he couldn't see the slight flush creeping into my cheeks. Jay didn't push further. He just leaned back, draping an arm across the back of the couch, still watching me like he had all the patience in the world. My hands went back to sweeping, but my thoughts were scattered. Why was he acting so different? And why did it feel like this moment was leading to something I wasn't prepared for? I kept cleaning, trying to ignore the way Jay's eyes followed me. It wasn't like him to just sit and watch. Usually, he'd either help out or head to his room. Today was different, and I felt uneasy. Out of nowhere, Jay's voice broke the silence. "Do you ever think about us?" he asked, his tone quiet but deliberate. The question caught me completely off guard. I froze mid-sweep, gripping the broom tightly as his words hung in the air. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. Slowly, I turned to face him, confusion written all over my face. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice uncertain. I searched his expression for some kind of clue, but he didn't look away. His gaze was steady, his face calm, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite figure out. Jay shrugged, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "I mean, do you ever think about how different things might be if we weren't, step-siblings?" he said, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. I blinked at him, trying to process his words. "I don't understand," I said slowly, shaking my head as if that would make his question make more sense. "Why would I think about that?" He gave a small, almost nervous laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I don't know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's just something I've been wondering about." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I stood there, holding the broom, unsure of what to say. Jay's question wasn't just strange, it felt like it was opening a door to something I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. "Jay, I started, but the words got stuck in my throat. Whatever he meant, whatever he was trying to say, I wasn't ready for it. I didn't even know how to respond. All I knew was that the easy, casual atmosphere between us had shifted into something I didn't recognize. And I didn't know where it was going next. Jay leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're always so focused on everything, school, work, cleaning the house. Do you ever stop to think about what you want?" His words made me nervous. I didn't know what he was getting at, and it felt strange. "Jay, what are you trying to say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Jay stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, and walked over to where I was standing. His face wasn't playful or teasing like usual, it was serious, almost intense. My hands tightened around the broom, my pulse quickening with each step he took. When he stopped in front of me, he hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "I think about you a lot," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. I stared up at him, unsure what to say or even how to feel. His words were so unexpected, so out of place, that for a second, I wondered if I'd misheard him. But the way he looked at me, his eyes searching mine, left no room for doubt. My heart raced in my chest, and I could feel warmth rising to my cheeks. Was I blushing? Why was I blushing? The sudden rush of emotions caught me completely off guard. No one had ever looked at me like that before, not even Jay. I started to say something, but my voice faltered. What was I supposed to say to that? Part of me wanted to step back, to put some distance between us, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I swallowed hard, my mind scrambling for a response, but nothing seemed right. Instead, I stood there, feeling exposed and unsure. There was something in the way he said those words, something that made me feel noticed, cared for, maybe even loved. And yet, it was confusing. Jay was my stepbrother. We weren't supposed to feel this way about each other, or at least, I wasn't supposed to. Was he serious? What did he even mean by this? My heart pounded as I looked up at him, searching his face for answers. But all I saw was honesty, plain and unguarded, staring back at me. The room felt smaller as Jay stood in front of me. "Jay, you're my stepbrother," I said, trying to remind him of our situation. But his expression didn't change. Jay reached out and gently touched my arm. "We're not related by blood," he said. His words sent a chill down my spine. "You know that doesn't make this right," I replied, my voice shaking. I stepped away, needing space to think. Part of me wanted to run, but another part of me couldn't ignore the way he looked at me. "I can't do this," I said firmly. Jay sighed and backed off, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." For the rest of the day, we avoided each other. I finished cleaning and stayed in my room, trying to forget what had happened. But Jay's words echoed in my mind. One evening, Jay cornered me in the kitchen. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. "About us," he replied. Jay opened up about how he felt, explaining that he had been keeping his feelings to himself for a long time. "I know it's wrong," he said, "but I can't help it." I didn't know how to respond, and yet, deep down, I felt something stirring within me. Part of me wanted him. It was a quiet, secret desire that I'd buried deep, something I'd never dared to admit, not even to myself. But another part of me was scared. This wasn't supposed to happen. We weren't supposed to feel like this, weren't supposed to cross this line. I didn't know what it would mean if we did, or what it would change between us. The silence between us grew heavier, the air thick with unspoken words. I glanced up at him, and the look in his eyes made my stomach flip. There was no going back now, something had already changed, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. Despite my efforts to avoid him, we kept running into each other around the house. Each time, the tension between us grew stronger. One evening, as I was heading to my room, the hallway dimly lit by the fading light of the day, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning slightly, I saw Jay walking toward me. His expression was unreadable, a mix of determination and something else I couldn't quite place. "Hey," I started to say, but before the word had fully left my mouth, he stepped closer, closing the space between us. "Wait," he said softly, his voice low but firm, and I stopped in my tracks. I looked up at him, confused, trying to figure out what was going on. Before I could ask, before I could even think, Jay leaned in. It happened so quickly yet felt like time slowed down. His face was inches from mine, and then, suddenly, his lips were on mine. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, like he was testing the waters. But then it deepened, becoming more certain, more deliberate. I stood there, stunned, my thoughts completely scattering as the moment unfolded. It felt unreal, like something out of a dream I hadn't known I was having. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound of it filling my ears. I didn't know what to do, how to react. This wasn't something I'd ever imagined happening, yet, here it was, happening all the same. When he finally pulled back, his eyes searched mine, as if looking for some kind of response. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, shock, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Jay didn't say anything either. He just stood there, watching me, waiting. And in that quiet, charged moment, I realized everything between us had changed, and there was no going back. One afternoon, Jay called me into the living room. His tone was serious, and the look on his face told me this wasn't going to be one of our usual casual conversations. He motioned for me to sit down, and I hesitated for a moment before finally taking a seat on the edge of the couch. Jay sat across from me, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. His expression was intense, like he was working up the courage to say something important. I could feel my heart racing, anticipation tightening in my chest. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice quieter than usual. He paused, his eyes locked on mine, and the silence between us stretched until it felt almost unbearable. "Do you feel anything for me?" he finally asked, his words steady but carrying a weight that made my stomach flip. The question caught me off guard, even though part of me had been expecting something like this. I looked away, staring down at my hands as I fidgeted with the hem of my shirt. My mind raced, searching for the right thing to say, but the truth was, I already knew the answer. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to look up at him. "I do," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I have feelings for you, too. Jay didn't say anything right away, but the intensity in his eyes didn't waver. I felt exposed, like I just laid my heart out on the table. But, I added quickly, my words tumbling out in a rush, I don't know what to do about it. This is so complicated, Jay. We're not supposed to feel like this. He nodded slowly, his expression softening as he leaned back in his chair. I know, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But I needed to hear it. I needed to know I'm not the only one feeling this way. The room fell silent again, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence. It felt like we were both trying to figure out what came next, where we could possibly go from here. And though the uncertainty was overwhelming, a small part of me felt relieved, because, for the first time, I wasn't carrying these feelings alone. Jay sat beside me, his tone gentle but firm. I promise to respect your boundaries, he said, his eyes meeting mine with a sincerity that made my chest tighten. But I need you to know my feelings haven't changed. They won't just go away. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. The weight of his words lingered in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. I don't know how to handle this, I admitted softly. He gave me a small, understanding smile. I'll wait, he said simply, for as long as it takes. Those words stayed with me, circling in my mind as we tried to navigate the fragile, uncharted territory we'd entered. But before either of us could think too much, the moment took on a life of its own. It started with a glance, then a touch, a brush of his hand against mine that sent shivers through me. Without saying a word, we found ourselves moving together, our footsteps leading us into the quiet of the bedroom. The air between us felt electric, charged with something we couldn't fight anymore. I don't know who made the first move. All I remember is the way his hands found mine, trembling but steady, as if asking for permission. Slowly, carefully, we began to undress each other. Every movement was deliberate, almost reverent, like we were trying to savor the moment. There was no rush, no hesitation, just the two of us, fully present with one another. The vulnerability was overwhelming but also exhilarating, a kind of trust I'd never experienced before. As our bodies came together, so did the emotions we'd kept hidden for so long. The pleasure was unlike anything I'd imagined, intense, consuming, yet tender. It wasn't just about the physical connection, it was about everything we'd been holding back, finally finding release. In that moment, it felt like the rest of the world faded away, leaving only us. But the morning light brought reality back into focus. As time passed, we learned how to navigate the complicated bond we now shared. It wasn't easy, there were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of what we were doing felt too much to bear. Yet, through it all, we kept moving forward. We couldn't ignore what we felt for each other, no matter how unconventional or challenging it was. Together, we found a way to make it work, one step at a time, discovering a connection that neither of us had expected but couldn't deny.